PTC Creo Parametric 3.0 Lesson 8, Part 1. In Lesson 8, we're going to create the assembly, and we're going to use the components that we've already modeled in Lesson 6 and 7. The swivel, the clamp arm, the stud, the long stud, and the ball and the foot. A number of these items are standard parts, and we're going to take them from either the car lane or from my website, whichever works better. I want you to do whatever it says in the book for the car lane parts, and that's at carlane.com. And basically we're going to actually go into and pick up the parts we need from here. And I'm not going to go through this because basically there's a lot of minute steps, and you can try that. I'm going to go over the alternative method. You could also do another method would be to model all the parts. So these three parts, the two studs and the nut, are very simple. You can model them. If you do model them, don't put the threads on them. The one problem with taking these off a car lane or off of my website is that they're extremely large because they've modeled the threads, which is not necessary. So again, you're going to go through these steps and pull up the parts directly from the website from car lane, and then you're going to save them under another name, add some colors, etc., make them ready for use in the assembly. What I'm going to do is show the opposite method, or the alternative method, and that's if for some reason you don't have access to car lane. You can get the standard parts, it says here, at cadresources.com. It also says the same thing here. So let's start with that. First of all, we'll go down here to where the actual assembly is and the parts. Stop there. These are the components we've already modeled. Now we're going to create the subassembly first. But what you want to do is make sure you have your parts all ready to go. So if you go to car lane and get the parts, follow the steps in the book. If not, you're going to be on CAD Resources site, and you're going to click on the book cover. I can go back here a little bit. So you click on the cover of the book that you're working with. This will be 3.0. And all the parts are over here. Now if you need the commercial version, they're here. And these four parts are actually all lumped together. You can click on any of these images and it'll download the same thing. So it's going to give you a zipped file of standard parts. And if you want, you can just extract that whole thing to the desktop or to the working directory. That would be better, whichever one of the working directories you're going to use for the part. I'm going to put mine in the desktop. Looks like it's taking a couple of seconds. You of course can just drag these over also. So we have our standard parts here on the desktop now, ready to go. And again, these would be better if we would have put them into our working directory. But for right now, I'm just going to do this kind of quickly so that you can use the parts so we can demonstrate the making of the assembly itself. I'm going to close the browser, and we're going to start the assembly. It's a new assembly, and it is the swing clamp subassembly. I'm just going to give it a quick name here. I'm going to uncheck the default template, and that way it gives you the opportunity to add your name and the description. In this case, it's the subassembly. We'll keep it simple. Do whatever it says in the book. It gives you, it tells you to use the swing clamp also as the name. So this puts information embedded in the assembly. Click on OK, and we want to go and set up the screen a little bit. We want to make sure our datum features are all shown. We go to the tree filters, and we want to show everything. This is very important when you're doing an assembly. so you can see everything over in the model tree. Not just looking at the parts, you're looking at the features in the assembly and the parts and the features in the parts. So basically we're going to add our first feature here. We're in the model tab. I'm going to click on assemble, and we're going to assemble the clamp arm. That's the first one that we're going to work with. And it's going to ask which version we want. We want the instance for the design. And basically just right mouse button and you can select default constraint, or you can click on automatic and click on default. It'll put the coordinate system locked into the other coordinate system. Middle mouse button or check will finish that. So you have your first component here. At this point, if you wish, you can go into your options and we can select isometric. It looks a little bit better when you're working in isometric. After the first component or feature is on your screen, you can go to this easily. If you wanted to add anything here, you could. You could also load your config file that you've created, and Creo textbook. Click OK. No, it went back. It actually, the default on that one, or I should say the one that's in that config, shows that the model display was set to isometric, so that's why it popped that back in there like that. All right, and we'll go to shading with edges, and that's our first component. So the components you're going to use, obviously, are the ones you've already modeled, and we're going to go to our swivel next. So assemble, and go to the swivel. And we're going to pick constraints. So I'm going to select the surface here. Now, if you wish, you can turn off all your datum planes. Some people prefer to do this so that you don't have to see everything on the screen. You may not wish to have those to select for constraints. So in this case here, we're only selecting the edge here, the surface, and the surface inside, like so. If you turn on your 3D dragger here, you can drag this because that's a direction that's not being constrained at this point. Drag it out a little bit. And we have coincident here. Let's add another constraint. So we're going to select here and right mouse button a couple times, and we can select the bottom. You can also rotate this around. And we want this to be, you can click on the here, or you can go up here. We want this to have a distance, and we'll drag this, whatever distance it says in the book, away. Now, since the part is round, we're not necessarily going to need a third set of constraints. So it's 1.5 inches, it looks like. But if you want to be able to rotate it, you're going to have to add a third set of constraints. So we have the first one's coincident, second one's distance. If we add a third one, here's a place where we want to turn on our datum planes so that we can see what we're going to select here. And our new constraint, let's select a datum plane that goes down the middle of the swivel. And let's select a datum plane that goes down the middle of the assembly, or we can do it in the middle of the component itself also. A little harder to pick up here. I'll just use this datum plane. Use whatever's in the book. Main thing here is we're getting these at 90 degrees. And let's see what we've got. So we got normal. We want to select angle. And we don't have to change it right now, but it gives us the opportunity later not only to be able to adjust the distance 1.5 to anything we wish, but the dimension for the angle is now going to show up. If we would have used assumptions, that meant that we didn't need to put in our third set of constraints because the third degree of movement would be irrelevant. But in this case, we actually do want to control the way the swivel looks and the position it's in rotationally. So now we have 2. Now one of the problems is here I've got all my components in the same color. Now if you go over to View, you can clear all appearances, you can add some appearances. If you want also, you could just simply open up one of these components. And I actually like to do it here. You can do it in the other, but I like to actually make the changes here. Let's pick that one. Middle mouse button. So close. So now I got one color on there. If you want to do the same thing on the other one, again, you can do it here, but you got to be careful. You don't want to change the color of the whole model. That's one thing people forget to do. Like if you want to do this, you don't want to be changing the model color for the assembly. You want to be just changing the component color, nothing else. So again, you can see you can clear appearances and start from scratch on it, but the assembly appearances are different than the models, the components. So again, I normally like to work here, and I normally would have had a better color on here from the very beginning. In this case, for some reason, I did not. So we have a couple colors there. Okay, so our third component, go back over to the model, assemble, and our third component is going to be the, better check, I think it's the foot. You could put in one of the other ones. You could put in the foot or the stud. I want to make sure I'm kind of following. It's going to be the foot. And if you hold down your Control Alternate key and middle mouse button, you can rotate the individual component. You can also move it over to where you want it to go with your right mouse button. Could have done that also with the 3D dragger. And we could also open this up into a small window over here. So if we had a complicated assembly, we can work in our extra window and select there. So in this case, I'm going to go and click the first thing I'm going to select is the revolved surface inside here, spherical surface, and then select the spherical surface of the swivel. And so let's see what it says, coincident. Let's use centered instead. Now the next one I'm going to use is I want to be able to make this face in a certain direction. So I'm going to select the face here and put my cursor here, right mouse button, until I get the underneath portion of my clamp arm. It says it's invalid. Excuse me. And that's because we don't want coincident, we just want parallel. And here we'll allow the assumptions. In other words, rotationally, we don't care what this is because it's a round part with no features that will allow it to really be positioned in another way rotationally. So I'll click the extra window here and turn that off. I got my component done. It's fully constrained. Check. Next one is the stud. It's the long stud, so be a little careful when you're opening this one. And I have this in session, so I'm going to go over here. And again, be careful. This is a 3.5 inch one, and this is the 5 inch one. So you want to make sure you get the right model. Open up. And here, again, if you wish, you can rotate this. It's not necessary, but if you want to do it, you can move it over closer if you want. Depends on how complicated your assembly is. I'm going to click on the surface here and the surface inside, and they become coincident. As long as I don't open up my placement window, I can keep going. So, and what I mean by that is otherwise I would have to go right mouse button and do new constraint. Or if I click the placement, then I would want to go here and click on new constraint. But I didn't have to do that if I would have just continued on after the first insert one that I had here. So I called it inserts, coincident. So I'm going to select the top surface here. So I don't think there's a datum plane on this model. And I'm going to select the datum plane that runs down the middle of the clamp. Now, I mean the swivel. Now be careful here and get the right one. And in this case, it's the distance, and it's 5 inches, obviously. So this is going to be 2.5 from one end. And again, the assumption is there because rotationally it doesn't make any difference. We don't need to control it. Middle mouse button to finish. I got the stud. Now, the last component for the subassembly is going to be the clamp ball. And again, if you want to move it around, that's your business, how fancy you want to get. If you have a very complicated assembly, this is very important. Again, if you wish, you can open up this in a sub window. And basically, we're going to select this surface here on the internal portions, the threaded surface. And we're going to come over here and select the surface of the stud. And let's flip that. You can flip it here too. And let's drag it out just so that we can see it better. And I'm going to go over to my book page here and go down and let's see where our next selection is going to be for the ball. So obviously the internal one has been selected, and here we're using the end of the clamp and the end of the, the end of the stud and the flat end of the ball here. So I'm going to select here. And a lot of these things are done differently in the book, gives you a different version of selection sequence, etc. So there's my clamp ball, but I want it to have a distance. And basically distance is going to be about 0.5 here. Again, it's not necessary to have a third set of constraints there. So middle mouse button, the ball is done. If the ball is still selected, you can select the ball, Control copy, Control C, Control paste, in other words, Control V, and it's going to ask for some stuff. So for instance, it says, what is the surface? Well, the surface is actually going to be the same. And then it wants to know what is the reference for the stud, which is at this end. And let's flip the constraint. And on this side here, I think it's really actually supposed to be 0.44. So let's look at our placement here. You can go back on the other one and change it to 0.44 so it doesn't bottom out as far as the threads go. Control D, zoom up, and we have our completed subassembly. And again, you want to go back and make sure everything's done right. You got your datum planes on everything. You want to have a color. I don't know what I want to do with this one. And you've got your subassembly created. Control D. Now, if you wanted, you could investigate this a little bit more, or you could add something to it. For instance, let's go over to Section, View, Tab, and then the planar. And let's go the X direction. And let's try a few of them. Let's try the Y direction. That's a pretty good one. Can actually drag this. And we'll try another one. How about just planar? Pick this datum plane here. Turn on the 3D dragger. Again, you can drag this. You also could rotate the section a little bit if you wanted to. And you can change the color if you wish. You can show the sectioning in lines. You can show it in 2D over here. And you can change the color of the section also. So you can fool around with this a little bit. Do what it says in the book, because you really do need a real section here going down the middle for when you get to the drawing. And you don't want to have it rotated like what I did here. Make sure you've saved the part. Let's see, I think I'm going to delete that one. Like so. Make sure you save the assembly, and then we'll continue on creating the full assembly. This is subassembly. Subassembly just means that it's an assembly inside another assembly. It doesn't mean anything else. This completes lesson 8, part 1.